Good afternoon. I'm Greg Braun, the Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County, and we're on location today in one of the areas in Port Salerno called an STA, a Stormwater Treatment Area. And a lot of people have heard about STAs, but they really don't know how they're going to work. So this is the next in our series of podcasts about environmental issues in Martin County. So if you've tuned in to some of the previous ones, we've talked with Eve Samples of the Friends of the Everglades and Mark Perry. We've got a whole setup of one per month, and this feature is going to be about STAs, and we're very pleased to have John Maehl with us with Martin County, who's going to tell us a little bit about the history of STAs, how many the county has, where they're located, what the reasons behind putting them in is, and we'll just spend about a half an hour and learn about STAs. So John, let's start with that. If that's a good enough introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been at the county, and what your areas of responsibility are.
You bet. Thank you, Greg. It's a privilege to talk about. The Martin County's just got a rich tradition of addressing water quality concerns and putting their money where their mouths are to make sure we're taking care of our own local basin issues. My name's John Maehl. I'm the Environmental Resource Administrator for Martin County, and I have the privilege of leading an incredible team of people that work on things from conservation land acquisition to our fertilizer ordinance to water quality retrofits, which is the topic of today's conversation, and a whole host of other things that are important to Martin County's residents. And we've enjoyed incredible support from our board for the efforts that our division gets to take part in. So you mentioned stormwater treatment areas. We were just talking about how that's kind of a bureaucratic name that probably comes out of the science and engineering world, and most people probably don't connect with that phrase. What it essentially means is we look at neighborhoods that were built before our current drainage standards. The standards that we have today for new developments put the onus on a developer to retain a fair amount of water and provide water quality treatment on the changes that they make to that land use as they build it. And in short, and at a minimum, the post condition has to match the pre condition, and most often it's significantly better. However, large parts of our community were built out before we had that progressive, forward-thinking regulations in place. And so about 24 years ago, the county embarked on addressing those in neighborhoods that were built before our current standards. And the projects involve a whole suite of different best management practices that are really tailored to that individual drainage basin. The one that we're setting at today is the Salerno Creek Stormwater Treatment Area. This was one of the early projects. It was completed in 2003. It was about a $3.5 million project. Lots of state grant funding and an EPA grant through their Section 319 program. It treats about a 1 square mile drainage basin and 28 acres of deep cell lagoon, and there's a feature that helps direct the water so that it has the most retention time, and then a carefully selected vegetative makeup on the littoral zones to help uptake those nutrients. Every single one's a little bit different, and we've learned recently that they all need to be kind of monitored and on their progress and how well they're performing, and sometimes they need vegetation tweaks. In some cases, they may need to have muck removal done or other treatments. There's a lot of new science out there to help us create better ones. This morning, we had a ribbon cutting for our 43rd stormwater treatment area in Old Palm City, and it's been an incredibly successful program. It's been a large part of how the county meets its basin management action plan, which is a tool that helps us to get the nutrient criteria, our concentrations, down to an acceptable level in the St. Lucie River and estuary. It's a statewide tool that's used to implement that effort for impaired waters all over the state. We're probably leading the state in progress on that. The other thing we do is septic to sewer to help meet that standard as well, and the county's made incredible progress on a very forward-thinking septic to sewer program. believe we've converted 6,000 units in the last 5 years, 6 years, and there's about 5,000 more units that are in some stage of planning, design, or getting ready for construction.
So we'll talk about the groundwater contribution to these kinds of things, but essentially all properties, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, or whatever, they're encouraged to keep water on their own property, but they don't have to keep all of it.
That's correct.
So the idea is the water that's coming off of those landscapes, no matter what it is, if it's parking lot or even the sod in your own front yard, well, maybe not yours, you probably have a lot of native plants, but the runoff that would come from someone's residential property, that's carrying nutrients and other kinds of things with it. And so the idea behind these STAs is what? To capture that and allow the plants to uptake those nutrients?
In general, at a 30,000 foot level, we're trying to slow down the water. So the neighborhoods that were built before the current drainage standards, they're going to run off water faster and in greater volumes than newer neighborhoods that are engineered to store at least 2.5 inches of rainfall, and there's lots of engineering that goes into that. But generally speaking, these neighborhoods, they drain faster and they drain more water quickly. So the first step is to slow it down. So a lot of times we'll have some kind of deep cell retention, like it looks like a pond, like the one behind us, and that allows the water to set still for a little bit, and sediments and heavier objects that are in solution will drop out, and there's all kinds of stuff attached to that stuff that ran off, that it gathered in driveways and roofs and gutters and storm sewers and yards. So the classic example is, if you fertilize your yard to make it green and lush, if it rains right afterwards, some of that fertilizer is going to travel off with the water, and it's going to end up in these surface waters, and it causes problems with nutrients we kind of think of as a good thing, but there are a necessary level for nutrients. However, when we have land use changes or humans come to an area, one of the things we do is put a lot of nutrients into the water, and those higher nutrient levels encourage things to grow that we don't want to grow. It discourages things we need to grow not to grow. It kind of upsets a delicate balance. And so you slow the water down, and then one of the best methods that we've used and others have is using plants to naturally take up those nutrients. Green plants that use photosynthesis, they also require certain levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, and so they kind of naturally take up those pollutants and trap them along with other things before the water leaves the system and ultimately makes it to the surface water.
Okay, so if these shoreline plants, and I see a lot of alligator flag next to us here, these were planted by the county, and you probably didn't need to fertilize them even when you put them in, because they're just naturally getting the fertilizer from the water.
Yeah, absolutely. It would actually defeat the purpose for us to add the fertilizer. The point is to take the fertilizer out, and in some cases we very intentionally planted certain plants, and in some cases the plants came on their own. Some plants do better than others, and we've gotten a lot better at it. We used to be fairly generic about the way we design and build these things. We've learned a lot from the hard work of universities and other scientists on what plants work best with different nutrient cocktails, and now when we build a stormwater treatment area, we actually do some monitoring ahead of time to understand what it is we're trying to treat, and we plant very specific plants in specific order and with specific depths to try and achieve the maximum result we can.
Okay, so right here we're seeing a lot of herbaceous kinds of stuff, and that's probably good for rapid uptake of the nutrients. But I would think trees would be an integral part of that, because for carbon sequestration and all that sort of thing. Kind of explain to us if the whole suite of herbaceous shrubs and trees, is that a component of it or not?
Trees can be. We don't normally design them into the projects for the treatment process. mostly because you've got ongoing maintenance, and so it's a consideration. We don't want to increase our operating costs significantly by having too much hardwood vegetation, and you also, on the banks of these things, for their integrity, you don't want to have trees that would get old and fall over and pull compromise the integrity of a levee, if you will. And so there are often trees. Usually those are more of a landscape element, and they provide shade. However, trees do a remarkable job of pulling moisture out of the groundwater. They're incredibly effective at creating they're in the cycle of evapotranspiration. They pull groundwater, and the leaves evaporate them. And so that's a very helpful way to mitigate flows. But largely the trees that we plant are more for aesthetic value, to make these pleasant recreational places as well.
Right. So where we're at right now, the Port Salerno STA is right off of Salerno Road. So if anybody is interested in coming down and looking at one of these, if you go down Salerno Road to Flounder Avenue, turn south on Flounder and just go to the dead end, and there's some parking along the side, and there are boardwalks, as you can see here, and I think there's a nature trail that goes along at least part of the perimeter as well.
Certainly. Yeah, most of our areas, we try to build in some kind of recreational aesthetic value. They happen to look just like ponds. They're natural areas. There's only a couple of exceptions where we used more of a chemical treatment process to achieve a higher level of nutrient reduction in a small footprint. Typically, our goal is to design something that is totally dependent upon Mother Nature. It does the work while we sleep and go on and do other things, and it looks natural. It is natural, and they make great aesthetic features to neighborhoods. So much so that, in fact, I'll get regular inquiries from realtors about where we're building our next stormwater treatment areas, because they tend to increase property value. This particular example has an extensive trail system and boardwalk system. They don't all have as much infrastructure as this does for the recreation element, but this is in a high traffic area. It ties together some neighborhoods, and it just made a lot of sense to do that here. Another thing that's unique about this site is a few years ago we worked with the Fish and Wildlife Commission to plant game fish, or to introduce game fish to this. And we often see folks fishing in this one, and we found that could be complementary to our main goal of water quality, and it just adds another element that makes this a value-added feature to the community.
Hopefully catch and release.
Yes.
You wouldn't want to be eating them, would you?
That's kind of an FWC question to answer. I've asked that question, and then they said they wouldn't be too concerned about it. The bottom feeding fish, you probably wouldn't, but the predator fish like a bluegill would probably be fine to eat. In fact, it's probably good for the fisheries balance if some of those bluegills are harvested. The largemouth bass, most people would put them back anyway. They're not really sought after for table fare as much as they are for game, and the balance, the fisheries balance, probably as well is probably, it's advantageous to release those and to take a few bluegill, but that's kind of, we defer to the FWC on that issue, and they tell us it's probably fine.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the Ripple project, and I was to that back a year or so ago, right when it was being constructed. I think the county is very creatively focused on native plants in that one.
Yeah, fortunately, a few years ago, we picked up an employee at Field Ops as a new position. I believe it's a horticulturalist position. Her name is Carly Batts, and she brings a whole host of enthusiasm, knowledge, and passion to this, and she's really upped our game in determining the best plant species to put in these, not just for the water quality and habitat value, but also for the aesthetic and native sustainability aspect of it. And she played a key role in determining that landscape planting for Ripple, and it's really elevated what we do in the stormwater treatment world at Martin County.
Yeah, so that one is in Palm City. and I don't remember the name of the road, but you probably have it on the tip of your tongue. How would people go to visit that one?
So there's multiple roads. There's kind of it's a linear facility that has really like 4 different stations, a combination of deep and shallow retention and streams, and it's south of Martin Highway and west of Cornell. It's really like 28th, 29th, 30th Street. And it moves from the northwest to the southeast, eventually ending at the end of 29th Street into the St. Lucie River.
Yeah, so there again, the idea is it's collecting water from the neighborhood, an old neighborhood that didn't have the kind of pre-treatment. It's allowing that water to flow through with the plants picking up the nutrients so that the water, when it goes into the South Fork, is in better condition.
Certainly. And it just so happens that if you walk through it on the trails that are there, you really think you're in a park. There's artistic elements to it that were cleverly included by the CRA, and that's another way that they've really raised the bar for how we develop these STAs to meet multiple objectives. There's shelters, there's a small dock where you could fish in a pond towards Cornell Street. No swimming. That's discouraged, and they're not made for that. The banks aren't really stabilized for ingress and egress to the water, but from an aesthetic and just outdoor enjoyment perspective, they're spectacular facilities.
Yeah, I was surprised when you said there's 42 of them. I have tracked various ones as they have come online, but I certainly didn't realize there were that many of them. I know in issues like this one, and certainly over there in Old Palm City area, one of the challenges is that the county actually needed to buy land where people were living to then create these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's part of your interest in making them aesthetically pleasing so that they fit well into the community.
The land acquisition, Greg, it's a great point. That part is probably our biggest challenge. And we're always trying to build these as efficiently as possible without using a lot of tax dollars. And as you know, land's not getting cheaper. So we really work hard at trying to identify where we need to build these projects, and then finding publicly owned property. One of the things that, or in one of our most recent cases, just south of us here, we were looking for a project to treat kind of the last tributary into the Manatee Pocket to get some kind of nutrient removal treatment. We worked with the landowner for 4 years to come to a mutually beneficial agreement where the county actually didn't have to buy any of the land. We got the land we needed. They got some zoning changes for some land that's really going to help achieve some of the CRA's objectives in that area. It was this great relationship that turned out to kind of benefit everybody, and no currency had to be exchanged on that one. It's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of partnerships, but we've also really excited about this. We've just kind of started a new program where we're looking at the potential to take our conveyance systems for stormwater, another way of saying ditch, and seeing what kind of treatment options we have in those conveyance systems. We had an engineering vendor identify 50 miles of county-owned ditches that could potentially be restored into a stream-like system with smart substrate, with smart vegetation, contouring, and the addition of channeling that would kind of mimic more of a natural stream system that would reduce the amount of maintenance. It would build in more natural treatment in what we already own and we've just regarded as a conveyance system in the past.
Yeah, that would be great. I think of things like Warner Creek up there in Jensen Beach. It's a stretch to think of that as a creek.
Yeah,
but
right.
maybe you
right.
guys can create or recreate what had formerly been a real creek and is now a ditch. But you've also done some creative things at locations where you can't even put STAs in. I know at my property up in Jensen Beach doesn't have enough room to put in an STA, but you put in a baffle box.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what those are and how that helps us address water quality in the urban areas.
You bet. In an area like you mentioned where you just don't have the space to do this, we've been doing this for a long time and they're all over the place. You drive right by them and don't notice them. Where stormwater will run into basically a box that attenuates the flows right inside the box, and it works somewhat similar to like the septic tank in your yard, where it fills up and then it has a drain that's up off the bottom, and so the heavy stuff settles out and you get really good nutrient removal in a really tiny space.
Okay.
The downside is you've got to clean those out. There's
Right.
a little bit more maintenance, but in terms of the cost per pound of nutrient removal, it's a pretty effective tool. In fact, we're going to build one into our Southwest Prong project. Even though we have space to do some ponds and wetlands, we're going to add that at the end just as a really good polishing tool.
Mm-hmm. So then do they have a vacuum truck like would take out the from a septic tank? That's what they use to
I think
suck
that's
up
it's similar to what they do with a baffle box. You just have to do it more often.
Right.
And occasionally you've got to swap out the media.
Yeah,
So there's a media in there that acts as the filtering agent, and there's several different products that are available now for that. And my sense is that some are better suited for different nutrients, and so we'll probably pick them based on what we're trying to treat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the other aspects that kind of troubles me when we're dealing with all this water quality stuff is I think it's great that the county has identified and then prioritized the whole process for septic conversions to county water and sewer. Describe to us, if you will, for those homes and properties that aren't connected up. You know, the septic tank system and leach field might all be working well, but isn't that doesn't take nutrients out. It doesn't take pharmaceuticals out. It doesn't take PFAS and all that sort of thing. Are those kinds of water constituents getting into things like these urban STAs and ultimately back out into the river?
It's a really good point, and there's not as much science as you would think that has been done on that. We've done some research, and frankly, we've been disappointed that we haven't found like that silver bullet study that says here's the outcome, or here's the forecasted benefit of making that investment. Intuitively, we kind of all know that septic systems were made to treat pathogens. They were made to eliminate that and make the water safe from a bacterial standpoint. They were never designed to deal with nitrogen and phosphorus. A healthy septic system seems to work pretty well on phosphorus because the phosphorus is more likely to bind to soil and particulate matter that's going to settle out in your tank or get trapped in your filter field. Nitrogen is soluble, and so particularly the organic nitrogen, and so there's very little treatment for the nitrogen, and so it's commonly held belief and rational to think that where we have dense urban development that's on septic systems near surface water, there's going to be a nitrogen contribution. So one thing we've done, because we weren't able to find that thorough peer-reviewed science to substantiate this, so we're going to do it ourselves. So one of our most recent projects that is probably the best example is Golden Gate. There were 770 connections or somewhere in that ballpark in like quarter-acre parcels or even smaller, duplex per quarter-acre parcels. Pretty intense concentration with a high water table very near to the Manatee Pocket. It's kind of a perfect storm for loading nutrients from human waste. And we knew that we had a septic to sewer program coming into that area, that the vacuum station we built, the infrastructure we put in, and we expected there to be a fairly high connection rate. And so years previous to that, we started a monitoring program with an engineering contractor who is building a model to help project future septic to sewer benefits. And this is a great example because when they finished the infrastructure last January, we had a very intense interest in making connection. I believe last I heard we were 70% connected in a year, and we expect for all intents and purposes to have full connectivity, and we're going to continue to monitor the surface waters around that and the effluent from that neighborhood, and we expect to be able to calibrate our model to demonstrate empirically the nitrogen and phosphorus removal benefits to septic to sewer, and then be able to apply that model with tweaked assumptions for each neighborhood. We believe the state will probably employ the use of that model statewide when we get in, because nobody else has done it, and we're doing it in a really thorough, scientific way. It should produce an actionable outcome that will help to encourage that investment everywhere. And that's important to us, because not only do we need to address nutrient loading right here, we're the downstream recipient of nutrient from all over the middle of the state. It's not just Western Martin County or Western St. Lucie County where we get engineered drainage from. When we get lake discharges, that's coming from all the way up in Orlando. So there's a whole lot of opportunity if we can prove a concept empirically and get the state's adoption of it, that it would help to encourage it in other places as well.
Yeah, good point. You've actually reminded me that the focus of our discussion here has been on the county's stormwater treatment areas and retrofits, but it's a multi-level thing. The federal government has it with the C-44, and the state certainly has it with a variety of the ones that are constructed and managed by the South Florida Water Management District. We've been talking about the ones at the county. The city of Stewart has some. In fact, they've just done an interesting little retrofit at the end of Illinois Avenue to capture some of that stormwater before it goes into the St. Lucie River. And then there are STAs and stormwater retrofits on private properties as well. I know several years ago I was successful in getting a grant that allowed us to do a retrofit on the Audubon property right there in the middle of Stewart. And we were able to take water not only from the Possum Long property, but from the surrounding neighborhood as well.
Yeah,
so
that's wonderful.
It's a multi-level action, and I think our initiative, and I think it's good because we all benefit as the water ends up getting cleaned.
It's really great being part of an organization that is intentional about being in leadership in these things. And another great example is we talked about our land development regulations, that they're probably are some of the oldest and best in the state for requiring stormwater retention. And just this year, the legislature passed a statewide stormwater rule that looks pretty similar to what we've been doing in Martin County for a long time. And so in large parts of the states where they have never had any of those impositions, they'll now have to do a lot like what Martin County's been doing, and that'll be a game changer. That'll have because we're downstream from a lot of those communities, we'll be beneficiaries of that here.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly some of those properties have been acquired as a result of Martin County voter-approved referendum.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk in a future episode about the Martin County Forever initiative, and we're going to hope that that will be successful in acquiring more lands like this, not just out in the boondocks, but ones in neighborhoods as well, funding through the Florida Communities Trust and others.
Yeah.
Well, we're wrapping up our time right now at this location, but we know on your staff, Mike Yustin is going to take us over to a different STA and talk with us about some of the innovative technology. Okay, we're back in the field at the Golden Gate North Stormwater Treatment Area, another one of the county's projects. We were talking before with John Maehl about how the county has had these over 40 projects over the last number of years, but the technology has improved as the whole concept has gotten more and more refined. So with me now is Mike Yustin. Thanks for joining us, Mike, to tell us about the stormwater treatment facility here at Golden Gate. Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Well, first of all, I'm Michael Yustin. I'm Senior Project Manager in the Martin County Environmental Resource Division. I've been working here 20 years. I have a passion for protecting our waterways from nutrient pollutions, habitat restoration. So I love getting to work on these different types of projects. So the one behind you, as he said, is the Golden Gate North project. And the Golden Gate North project is an STA that was constructed probably about 20 years ago. Some of the things that you'll notice about this site, and one of the things that we struggle with, is that these areas get developed before we have this network of stormwater treatment areas in place. And the problem with that is that once we get here, we have very limited opportunities in terms of where we can put and house an STA. So really, if we wanted to effectively treat all the nutrients that are coming out of these neighborhoods and these areas, we need a lot more space. So we kind of just build what we can. We find a piece of property that's available, we build our STA, and then do the best that we can with it. So in this case, there are kind of two different features that we have to our normal STAs. We tend to have deep water lake areas, which are important because of the water kind of spreads out and it slows down. And over time, some of those nutrients, especially phosphorus, can kind of percolate down and end up in the sediments and get removed from the system. But then we also need shallow areas. And the reason why we need shallow areas is because they have vegetation, they have plants. And those plants are actually much more effective at absorbing nutrients. But in this case, we didn't have a lot of room for everything that we would have wanted to do. So in this case, a lot of the STA is a deep water lake, and we don't have much of that shallow littoral zone plants that can help with the nitrogen uptake. So what we do is we adapt. We try different things. And in this case, we tried what's called bee mats. And bee mats are basically, you create these floating mats and you just put plants down in them. And those plants sitting in the water column will start to absorb those nutrients. And what's even better about this kind of system is that you pull those plants out of the STA eventually. And what the plant does is it captures those nutrients and it holds it in the plant, it holds it in the root. But over time, if it's just planted along the bottom, those nutrients end up in the soils and in the sediments. So it's not actually removed from the system. And over a period of 15, 20 years, that can be a real problem. But with these bee mats that you see behind you, we come in periodically, we pull all those plants out and take them off site, and then we put new plants in that can then grow and absorb even more nutrients. So that's kind of what you're seeing behind you, is these floating blue mats. It kind of looks dead now, but the only reason that it looks like that is because we went in, we harvested all the plants, then we put in some new smaller plants that will then grow and absorb even more nutrients.
Yeah, great. And in this particular one, because we're pretty close to Willoughby Creek in the river, this has actually got some salinity to it.
Yes, correct. So a lot of these communities are built right near our lagoon areas, right near our places that have salt water and salinity. And during king tide events, that salt water will actually back up into this area. So originally we tried freshwater plants in these bee mats, but we found that they were dying off because of these salinity events. So now we just adapt and we go with more salt tolerant species that we put in here that will be able to survive those king tides and that higher salinity event.
Yeah, so the mangroves, I see black mangroves here, reds down along the shore, some bulrush, some leather fern. I guess those are all doing the job of uptaking those nutrients.
Yep, and any plant helps.
Innovative kind of project, Mike. And I also want to thank you for the work that you've done over the years down at the Kitchen Creek STA. Those who have watched our previous podcast and are engaged with what the Guardians are doing, our Loxalucy initiative, Headwaters initiatives, is to acquire those lands in the Bridge Road corridor to make the connection up so that we can get cleaner water into the Loxahatchee River, through Kitchen Creek, and to the South Fork. So John, if you would, bring us this map, and maybe Mike can describe to us a little bit about what's going on with the Kitchen Creek STA project.
So a lot of people don't realize that here in Martin County, we actually have two river systems. We have the St. Lucie River system, that we're all aware of, but we also have the Loxahatchee River system. So the St. Lucie is up near the North County line, the Loxahatchee River is by the South County line. And the problem with the Loxahatchee River is that we've done such a good job of draining the land that we get rid of all that fresh water that would have flown through the cypress sloughs and the wetland systems in Jonathan Dickinson State Park and the surrounding areas. And what happens is you then don't have any of that water left during the dry season. So it all just gets flushed out the tide, it's gone, and it can't be used. And that allows, in the dry season, salt water comes further up the river than you would find naturally. So really, the basic premise of Loxahatchee River restoration is to capture as much water as possible during the rainy season, hold it, and then release it during the dry season. So the Kitchen Creek project was a little different than these other STAs. Our primary goal of that project wasn't to capture nutrients, it was to capture fresh water. So basically what you had is that Bridge Road, which is right here, down in Hope Sound. You have a ditch that comes down and continues all the way down into what's known as Kitchen Creek in Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And it was really effective at just pulling all that fresh water, getting rid of it, it's gone, and none of it's usable. So the county looked for opportunities and places to start capturing that water, and that's what Kitchen Creek did. We put a plug, like a weir, a dam, in the middle of the ditch, and we pushed water down into this property right here. And if you can zoom in on this a little bit, this was an old vegetation recycling facility. It's probably one of the ugliest properties in all of Martin County, just loaded with mulch and tree limbs and also even like roofing tiles, like clay roofing tiles. This, all kinds of things were all dumped on this one property, really in what was a significant area for Kitchen Creek. So we just kind of came in and we just got rid of all that material, just got all of that site, and we dug a big hole so we could push the water. And this is kind of another look at it. The water comes in down here from the north and comes here. We put a weir right here that blocks that water, and then it will push it into this lake system that you see right here. And it will come all the way down to here where we had another weir that will put it into this wetland area right here. So the county, over a period of 10 years, was planning this project and designing it, and we constructed it. And now we have this kind of gorgeous lake area that you can walk around and recreate with your dogs. People ride horses around it. There's a nice grass lawn that goes all the way around it. It's one of the nicer parks, in my opinion, that we have here in Martin County.
And Mike, the access to that is off 138th Street, right?
Well, yeah, so first of all, you would, if you're going down Bridge Road, you would turn down Powerline Road, and you take that until it dead ends at 138th Street, and you take a right, and then you'll see a big preserve sign on the right-hand side that says Kitchen Creek Preserve.
And so that's been instrumental in helping the Guardians strategize and prioritize what properties we ought to buy for the Loxalucy Headwaters project. So our first acquisition was 2 miles of frontage along the north side of Bridge Road right here. Our second acquisition is over in this area, which, not by coincidence, abuts a county-owned property of about 100 acres right here. So the idea behind our projects here is to acquire those lands that, in the big picture, we can work with the county to improve the water quality.
And I would say that acquisition and preservation in that area is also a priority of Martin County. Several of the properties in that area are in it's called the Florida Forever program. It's a state land acquisition program whose goal is to preserve environmentally sensitive lands, and could be the part of a giant state park that would extend all the way from Atlantic Ridge, which goes all the way up to Cove Road, all the way down into Jonathan Dickinson and to Jupiter. So we have the potential to create this massive state park right here in our own backyard.
Perfect. Okay, thanks for that summary, Mike. So thanks for taking the time to be with us, and certainly stay tuned for future podcasts where we're going to be talking about other water quality related things. The ORCA, the Ocean Research Conservation Association, is going to speak with us. We're also going to be talking about why native plants are good for the environment and why we need to get rid of invasive and plant those things that do well without a lot of extra care. So thanks, John, for taking the time.
Thanks, Greg. My pleasure.